Welcome to The Beat. I'm Ari Melber. You begin with the pressure that is actually working. If you just big picture say, okay, we're in the second Trump term, and some people have a very strong feeling against him, some for him, others wondering how this was all going to go because they've been pushing. Well, there have been a series of bruising setbacks that might partly just be because of reality, meaning what the markets think about tariffs, what other countries think about these threats, but some of them have to do with effective pushback. In first term, they called that resistance. Now it's protesters that have been a part, by Musk's own admission, of driving him out of government. Or take these law firms. If you look on your screen and you think about what do the scales of justice even mean? Well, usually they mean both sides fighting, not one side just giving up. And the law firms who are fighting back, in some ways, are winning. And then you have voters pushing back at town halls all around the country. So that's kind of where we start tonight because Musk is exiting under pressure. Republicans are facing pressure after their mega bill is finding a lot of criticism and concern, both from Main Street, from red districts, and from Wall Street. You have Republican Senator Ernst. She's in her home state is Iowa, which tends to go more conservative lately. But the front page of the Des Moines Register shows her at the infamous town hall where her defense of the idea that Republicans are using this moment to slash your health care and funnel money to multimillionaires is, quote, well, we are all going to die. That was how she defended the health care cuts, setting off this firestorm.
They are not eligible, so they will be coming off. So people are not, well, we all are going to die. So, for heaven's sakes.
For heaven's sakes is right. Republican Iowa Senator Joni Ernst caused quite a stir with those comments.
Republicans' complete indifference on display at town halls.
Her response was, well, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
And that may be true, but you don't have any right to kill me.
I made an incorrect assumption that everyone in the auditorium understood that, yes, we are all going to perish from this earth. So I apologize. And I'm really, really glad that I did not have to bring up the subject of the tooth fairy as well.
That's what passes for a kind of response today. You can see she's feeling enough pressure that she has to say something. Her staff might have said we could apologize, we could get serious, we could make a joke, or we could do this. She recorded that video in a graveyard and brings up the tooth fairy to try to suggest that anyone criticizing her is somehow juvenile or not getting it. But the real world impact of the health care bill is what people care about, apparently in Iowa, where this has become a problem for her. 9 million people across the country could lose their health coverage. So the very real question is whether the government is actively taking steps under Republicans that endanger people's current health care, not whether the fact is that we all know we are mortal. Other Republicans continue squabbling.
Look, I want to vote for it. I'm for the tax cuts. I voted for the tax cuts before. I want the tax cuts to be permanent. But at the same time, I don't want to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion.
I've got some concerns. I think we need to look really, really careful at that. I continue to maintain my position. We should not be cutting Medicaid benefits.
My loyalty is to the American people, to my kids and grandkids. We cannot continue to mortgage their future.
That's some of the back and forth. While I mentioned that real world external forces can also push back on what the government's doing, this government under Trump and the Republicans in control of Congress has been pushing fast, breaking things, as they say, in tech land. Well, Wall Street thinks the bill won't actually help and may even hurt, damage the broader economy. And so that's what's happening right now for people tracking as we begin the summer, what Republicans want to do with what could be the most far-reaching economic and healthcare bill of this first year of the Trump term. Beyond that, the Wall Street Journal reports that 11 big companies are now moving work away from the law firms that settled with the Trump administration or giving or will give more business to firms that have been targeted but refuse to strike deals. Call that a fighting spirit. This includes major players, Oracle, Morgan Stanley, Microsoft, McDonald's. A general counsel saying if firms facing White House pressure don't have a hard line, they don't have any line at all. In other words, that's the kind of legal business case against just surrendering. Separate from who you voted for, these are firms making business decisions saying, if you just give in to the government on this, you might give in to other regulators, government, or entities quickly. The protests against Musk have gone on for weeks. We've tracked them in some cities, small and organic, and others larger and more organized, sometimes on the side of the road, other times at Tesla dealerships. And what we've found is that it worked in the sense that Elon Musk left and admits to people that the pressure and this kind of toxification of the Tesla brand by engaging in this kind of politics for him was something that he had to stem. He may be rich and powerful, but he had to deal with it. And he's leaving that government role behind.
Business leaders and innovators, the world.
Wondering what your thought is on the ban on foreign students, the proposal. I mean, you were one of those kids, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to stick to, the subject of the day, which is like spaceships, as opposed to, presidential policy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was told anything's good, but
No, it's a bit unfair because like Doge became the whooping boy for everything. So if there was some cut, real or imagined, everyone would blame Doge.
That is not the sound of someone doing a victory lap. He can see people would blame his efficiency group, which he calls Doge, which is also the name of a coin he's invested in. But he sees that. He sees some things didn't work, and he says he became the heat shield for Trump. Maybe Trump outsmarted him and knew that Elon could become this sort of middle ground. But you also saw in there the spilling out of the pressures because Musk clearly thinks that that interview is about spaceships and his business. The interviewer says no, he doesn't think they agreed to any terms. But underneath that is the awareness that Elon Musk, who remember, courted actively being a MAGA leader, wearing the hats, going to the conferences, donning the chainsaw, going out to states that were having votes. He wanted that in the headlines. Remember, that was very recent. And now he's publicly admitting, or maybe he hoped that part would get cut out of the taped interview, but he's admitting, no, that's not the topic of the day. Well, Mr. Musk, with all due respect, that's your topic of the months, and frankly, all the way back to the middle of the campaign season. It was what you wanted to do. And now that you are apparently not liking how it's going or you're losing, you don't want it to be the topic of the day anymore. In public service, it's not that simple because the people had something to say about this towards the government, towards his businesses, towards the markets, towards the value of Teslas, and Musk is on the run. So there are still, however, the lingering questions about what we just lived through as a government and a nation. Trump wondering whether all of the talk of cuts didn't work or weren't true. The Journal, again, a Murdoch-owned outlet, says, was it all, quote, BS, Trump asked, wondering whether Musk could have ever come close to the cuts he promised. Imagine that, two people who are effective, if at nothing else, at spinning PR narratives, eyeing each other and wondering who was spinning who from the beginning. Trump described Musk as, quote, 50% genius, 50% boy. Musk also said, quote, I have to get some heat off me and my companies. That's what Musk said privately, according to the Journal's reporting. Musk has not gone that far in public, but he has a similar message that basically it's time to focus on business. Spaceships are the subject of the day, not politics. This was a short stint for politics. Cabinet secretaries serve years, sometimes across 2 terms. Musk is out in 130 days, and he finds himself down $70 billion since the inauguration. Musk also says Doge's work will continue. Others say without him there as the muscle, it will fizzle out. That's what one former staffer says. And that could be welcome news. It can be hard sometimes to absorb all of this in real time. In fact, there were people during it who said, is this really happening? Someone who wasn't elected to anything, didn't pass any transparency vetting or divesting rules to even run a cabinet agency, seems to be overseeing not only the administration at times, but disassembling parts of the government that were bipartisan passed by lawmakers for years. Some of that did happen. Some of those jobs are gone. A lot of it was stalled once the courts got a hold of it. And now the guy doing it is gone, and he's asking you, please don't discuss this, what he actually did and what the results are. Let's just talk about spaceships. Well, he can say that on some shows and in some interviews, but We don't have any such limitations here, and we have two special, independent, free-thinking guests to get into it, no holds bar, and we're back in 90 seconds. As Musk exits and Republicans are doing some of their own infighting over their budget plan, we bring in our experts tonight. Maya Wiley, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, also a former civil prosecutor, and Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist, friend of The Beat. Welcome to you both. Maya, what you see with Elon Musk, if you believe the Wall Street Journal reporting and other indications, is someone who, in a naive or privileged sense, is upset that he wasn't better received. He's upset that he was what he calls the, quote, whipping boy. And yet at the same time, him and Trump are eyeing each other going, wait, who actually got something out of this if they look at it as self-interest and not public interest?
Well, look, I mean, whatever Elon Musk went into this for, he's getting $8 million a day in federal contracts. And I say that because there's no question that while on the one hand, DOGE has done dirty to a lot of Americans, and a lot of Americans have felt some real pain. And the chaos and confusion that it has created was quite clear, especially when you consider things like whether or not there's even going to be Alzheimer's research or clean air and water, or whether a community is going to get some of the federal funds that were supposed to clean up sewage backing up in their homes. These are very practical, real life experiences for people, and they don't really like chaos in government. And Elon Musk with his chainsaw was right there, frankly, on the street corner, making people feel the chainsaw. So I say that because he didn't get much out of that. But I have to remind us all that part of this, whether we're talking about that big ugly bill that they're calling a beautiful bill, or whether or not we're talking about what DOGE has been doing inside of government, is fundamentally about corruption. It's about how much, look, some of the things that you've been pointing to in your lead up to this segment, Ari, was really about why are people capitulating? It's really about whether or not they're going to be able to get that government business, whether or not they're going to be able to have access to the government that helps them make money. And that's the corruption part. So I'm just saying that to say, put aside whether or not he benefited, not benefited. He definitely lost a lot. The organizing and actions mattered a lot, and now there's a lot of finger pointing.
And Gene, this wasn't ultimately a serious process. Washington has obviously repeatedly dealt with budget commissions. You've covered some of them over the years. The serious ones, they look at a 10-year timeline, they look at everything holistically, and they try to get Congress to make future plans to deal with certain things. The interest payments are high. I don't think anyone can look at the math and not see that. But this was all backward looking, trying to sort of claw back things that were already funded and then fire people, some of whom got rehired. And it was done. It was very sloppy. And so I'm curious, as someone who benefits from the reporting that you've done over the years, where does this fit in the seriousness of all that?
Way at the bottom. Way at the bottom. I mean, you use one word that's appropriate here. You use the word plan. There was no plan. There was the only plan was the metaphorical chainsaw, and as you said, clawing back a spending that had already been made, not even really understanding what they were looking at in a lot of cases when they said, "Oh, we're saving $50 billion on this," when in fact it wasn't that big a savings. They had literally no idea what they were doing. It was a really amateurish effort. That said, they did a lot of damage. And, look at the Agency for International Development, which they did chainsaw, which they essentially obliterated, which is having a very real cost in human life and human health in parts of the world where we once really made a difference, and we're not making that difference now. And as you said, courts have slapped down or slapped back a lot of these actions, but from what I hear, most of those contracts that are supposed to be restarted or those grants that are actually supposed to go out are not, in fact, going out. So there are real consequences to this really amateurish effort.
Yeah, look at this headline from Fortune that at the end of the day, this, even the wording is funny, right? Gene, you know your way around Pulitzer Prize winning reporting. Doge's federal workforce cuts, that's a word that refers to less, may cost, that refers to more, 135B this year alone, which then gets to the point of like, do we even call them cuts? Gene, help us out.
Exactly. Are they really cuts? And the answer is we don't really know.
Right.
They don't really know. What we do know is that there's nowhere near the savings that they even claimed, much less the trillions of dollars of savings that they promised and projected. Immediately went down from 2 trillion to 1 trillion, and then it was hundreds of billions. And as it turns out, it's a negative figure. Okay, so that tells you how effective Doge was.
Yeah, and I don't know enough about like auctioneering to know what it's called. Someone must know what it's called when you reverse auction, instead of going down instead of up, right? There's got to be, like, if they do a clearinghouse sale, but it's a live auction or a, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like, there's got to be some term for that. Someone will tell us. But
I think it's called waste.
It's called waste. But I feel like if you were at like a clearinghouse and they're saying, well, we'll start with this surplus stuff and the price will go down. That's what we're about to show.
They were supposed to get rid of the waste, fraud, and abuse instead of bringing.
But there never was. They weren't ever going after waste, fraud, and abuse. They were going after the ability of our government to deliver for our people what Congress said they were supposed to deliver. It's that simple. So no wonder people didn't like it. No wonder it didn't work to save money, because they didn't even pay attention to what the consequences would be. We still have Americans abroad who can't get out of countries because they decimated USAID, and the very ability to protect our people abroad after all that Benghazi talk with Hillary Clinton. But this is what Doge helped do. So it was never really about waste.
And
it was never about.
No, I think that's important, Maya, because it's not waste if you're just saying, well, we don't like this thing and we should fund it less. That's called policy debate. And like I mentioned, in the future budgets, you can have that debate. They more did the clawback. As for the reverse auction, I do want to show Elon Musk over the time period. The beat producers here have put this together. The numbers dropping. Take a look.
I think we can do at least 2 trillion.
Yeah!
We can actually find $1 trillion in savings. I'm confident that over time we will see $1 trillion of savings. We anticipate savings in FY26 from reduction of waste and fraud by $150 billion.
Now, Gene, that's a real drop even in the PR MAGA bubble of those meetings. And you really have to wonder whether he was learning as he went and suddenly found out that the big stuff, even this sort of semi-lawless or however you want to call it approach, that even this president can't just cancel Social Security payments, right? That's not going to work. You're going to be enjoined the very next morning. And so the big stuff, what they call the safety net and other things, Pentagon, he wasn't able to hit. And so he starts lowering his own number.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you take away the stuff that he couldn't hit, he couldn't possibly go after, there's not all that much left, of the so-called discretionary spending. And so it was just ridiculous from the beginning. There was no way they were going to hit those targets. Elon Musk, theoretically, in some other universe, he could have done a useful thing. He could have come in and said, I'm going to rationalize and modernize the IT of the federal government. Right, I'm gonna make the computer systems speak to each other and work better for the people. Because they're kind of a mess. And that would have been a really useful thing that I would think he would be qualified to do, but he didn't.
I'll give you one. If we're going to play this game, now that he's left, Maya, we're just playing this game. He could have done what many business leaders have done. And he could have, well, let's go and we'll just give me both guests back so I can see everybody. There we go. I like seeing both of you. He could have done what other business leaders have done, which is whenever you think of rich people and whether they're overvalued, a lot of people historically have retired, divested, and taken up public service at whatever age that they make that shift. He could have left those companies, Gene, and run NASA without the conflict of interest of being on the other side of the table. And maybe that would have been interesting. But instead, he couldn't give up his money because what does he say? It's not about public interest. As Maya said, it's not about cutting waste. He says, I need to go back and make money for Tesla. That matters more than whatever he claimed to be doing.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Maya, and then Gene.
Well, yes, and that was my point. This is it's corruption in the sense of access to power and the proximity to power that then gets you some of those contracts and some of those relationships. And that's why we saw other companies starting to fall down on the knee and say, I'm going to be more masculine, or I'm going to move closer to being near, and because I want to be a Trump buddy. And we won't say diversity, equity, and inclusion anymore, even though it's both, a good thing, and Americans like it. But we'll use it to weaponize. But here's the thing that we should not miss about part of what Elon Musk did with Doge is he took our data. He took our information. He has made us vulnerable to all kinds of attack as regular, ordinary people. And for the government to even weaponize, they're now talking about helping states purge voter rolls. And let me just tell you, if you got married and changed your name in a database in government that has nothing to do with your ability to vote, they can use that, even though it's no longer up-to-date data, to potentially try to get states to purge you. And that's just one of the many things. Surveillance. I'm just saying that because remember that Doge also sent some very young, inexperienced, highly ideological individuals to not-for-profit organizations to try to take information from them that they had no lawful right to take. And so when we think about Doge and what Elon Musk did there, it is in addition to your point about if you really wanted to do public service, you could have found a way to do public service. If it wasn't just about your personal graft, but remember he runs a tech company. Remember that he is also competing for that data, but he's also enabling the utilization that can still happen that is going to impact our civil rights. And that's why we as a coalition are working to stop that.
Important. Appreciate that, Gene. Now I'm running over on time, but I give you final word.
Well, just one word. Let me shout out to those law firms that resisted. And I'm so happy that companies are turning to them, because who wants a lawyer that wusses out in the way that some firms did? So I think that's a positive sign for the health of our humanity.
Really appreciate the points raised here. And I almost feel like there's a note of semi-positivity to start the week from what I've heard from both of you. So thank you both for that, Maya and Gene. I want to tell folks what's coming up. The Royal Tenenbaums director, Wes Anderson, will be here tonight. Very excited to have him on the beat tonight. And there is some buyer's remorse among certain Trump voters who thought that mass deportation would never hit anyone they personally know. And Putin reeling after these new Ukraine strikes. It is a big story that continues to upend the world and shows the limits of Donald Trump's personality foreign policy. So I want to mention all of that's coming up because we have a lot in the program. We also have a news update on that devastating attack right here in America in Boulder, Colorado. Tonight, a suspect is in custody, charged with a federal hate crime after the allegations of attacking this group of demonstrators yesterday, Sunday. Authorities say the suspect basically used what was a, quote, makeshift flamethrower to attack this group. They were rallying peacefully in support of the Israeli hostages kidnapped by Hamas. The group meets regularly, so there may be some way that people were tracking how to come after them. 8 innocent people, some in their 80s, now hospitalized for the severe burns and injuries in this clearly targeted attack. Now, we're going to show right now the aftermath of that scene. It is a warning here, as we tell you before we do these kind of things, that what you see here will to many be disturbing. A suspect, a 45-year-old Egyptian national, was heard yelling, quote, "Free Palestine" during the attack. That's according to FBI sourcing. They call this a targeted terror attack. Federal law enforcement reporting they found at least 14 unlit Molotov cocktails, explosives that could have hurt or taken more lives. That was near the scene. Witnesses describing the event.
He had 3 Molotov cocktails. One of them he threw inside of a group.
There was another lady on the ground with really bad burns on her legs, just like screaming.
The most horrific thing that I've ever seen in my entire life.
The state charging this as a first-degree murder. A death is actually not required for a murder charge in Colorado. It's like capital murder and other cases where, depending on the facts, the authorities charge it that way. The DHS says the suspect was also in the United States unlawfully because the visa that he was here under expired in March. As a immigration matter, he had not exhausted all technical legal options for someone who had overstayed a visa. That is the update on a very disturbing story. We'll be right back. There are certain basic through lines, centers of gravity in politics that transcend any given time. So we all know we're in this Trump era. We went Trump, Biden, Trump, and a lot of discussion is about that. But there's a more basic through line that we hear, which is, did you vote for this? People have said that as long as there have been elections, and they often say it when things turn sour. Either they're not going well or they're going worse than people thought they would. And that brings us to a story that is not about all the Trump criticism or what I've told you about the markets rejecting things. It's about how Trump voters feel and why some have clear buyer's remorse. Take Missouri, where there is a rural county where Trump dominated. He won 80% of the vote. That's 4 out of 5 voters. And you go to the coffee shop, 4 out of the 5 people randomly are Trump voters. But many are now unhappy with something he did say he would do, which is strict mass deportation. The reckoning is coming because it's gotten personal in their own community and backyard with an ICE detention. Carol Way has been there a long time. She came to the U.S. from Hong Kong about 20 years ago. She got 3 kids. She works 2 waitressing jobs, classic example of a hardworking person in Missouri who apparently is well-liked in her community. But she was denied asylum previously and then was here at one point legally under what they call an order of supervision, which is a temporary way you can stay in the country, even without perfect legal status. Her lawyer explains that their argument is they had that. Then she was blindsided and summoned by officials who told her that they would actually help her get a better passport and things would be okay. That then led to her detention under these Trump administration aggressive policies. And here she is speaking from jail for the first time.
I know they vote for Trump. Trump want to make America better. That's great. But we're human. We make a mistake. But at least give us a chance to fix it. I want to see my family. I want to be able to give a hug for my daughter, for my children.
That's what it sounds like at an individual level. One person who's been in America a long time. If I were simplifying the law here, I would say she has been here under the color of law lawfully part of the time, and technically without the color of law, technically unlawfully for part of the time. Historically, people in those situations who work an honest job and put down roots, they're not the ones that are prioritized for detention and removal. That's generally been true. That's not true today under the Trump administration. And now her neighbors, roughly 4 out of 5 who voted for Trump, and some who have said publicly in their remarks that they voted for Trump, are upset that Trump's policies are coming home and hitting their community. One of her friends says, quote, to the New York Times, "No one voted to deport moms. We were all under the impression we were just getting rid of the gangs, the people who came here in droves." A different individual there said she's exactly the sort of the person you'd want to come to the country. I don't know how this fits into the deportation problem with Trump. And that's the whole point. It fits in because this is what mass, broad, kind of aggressive, untrammeled mass deportation looks like. There's other reports about how far the administration is going. For example, a 4-year-old from Mexico who may have difficulty or lack of access to what is believed to be a life-saving treatment because the family's legal status was revoked. Outrage over 2 high school students detained by ICE. Again, are minors who aren't breaking any other criminal law the priority? And a poll shows a majority of voters now, having let it sunk in for 130 days, think Trump's immigration enforcement has already gone too far. If you look at that percentage, that would naturally include some people who voted for him. And so the question becomes not, how do you feel about all this stuff in the abstract, but how do you feel when it comes for you and your friends in your community? That's an update, courtesy of some of the reporting from the Times and elsewhere. By the end of the hour, we will hear from Oscar-winning director Wes Anderson, who makes his Beat debut with a very interesting new film. But next, Donald Trump falling short in his claims that his personality and his sort of ideas of strength would somehow back Putin down. Important story that we get to next. Turning to reporting out of the war in Ukraine and a blow to Putin's Russia. On Sunday, the Ukrainian security services released a video which seems to show several drone strikes on airfields that they attempted deep in Russian territory. Ukrainian President Zelensky says 40 Russian aircraft were hit. That's according to one side in the war. Footage taken from further away also suggests the damage, with smoke billowing in the air and some extra corroboration of those attacks. These came before attempted peace talks did formally resume again today. President Trump had promised to, quote, end the war on his first day in office, and he has repeatedly suggested that his personality or relationships will succeed where other hard-fought U.S. foreign policy has somehow failed in this often intractable conflict. If you're keeping track, we're 4 months into the term, and he has not done that, ended the war. On Putin's side, there aren't much signs that he cares when Donald Trump publicly criticizes him. There has been a lot of discussion about the relationship between these two nations when Trump is in charge, and Putin, of course, has stayed in charge. The New York Times notes Trump's preference for praising Putin, the idea that maybe they would show a warmth that would get the U.S. what it wants, or an off-ramp to this long-running war now. That has not, the Times reports, made progress towards the peace that Trump says he wants to deliver. The president now says he is also prepared to, quote, just back away and allow the fighting to continue if the two leaders can't make progress. And when you think about a sentence like that, it is, of course, complicated to think about ending a war or foreign policy, but you will notice that at a minimum, that's the kind of statement that is exactly what Trump and Republicans criticized several years of the Biden administration for. The idea that you might support a resolution, and they obviously supported Ukraine with money, but that you weren't getting anywhere. Now we're still not getting anywhere, and Trump says he might just back away. In a more uplifting note, we will return with the Oscar-winning director Wes Anderson making his Beat debut.
I'm not in love with you anymore.
I didn't know you ever were.
Let's not make this any more difficult than it already is.
Okay.
Okay, what?
Okay, I'm not in love with you either.
Yes, I know. You're in love with Richie, which is sick and gross.
Tonight, we are joined by a very special maverick. Academy Award-winning director Wes Anderson makes his debut fresh off the new film, The Phoenician Scheme, starring Benicio del Toro, Mia Threppleton, Michael Cera, Tom Hanks, Scarlett Johansson, Benedict Cumberbatch. The list goes on. Here's how it looks.
Rescue workers are laboring to recover and identify the remains of Zsa Corda, international businessman, maverick in the fields of armaments and aviation, among the richest men in Europe. This was Corda's 6th recorded airplane crash. He is survived by 10 children, 9 boys, 1 nun, his daughter Liesl.
Academy Award-winning director Wes Anderson joins us now. Welcome.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you. Great to be here.
Really great to have you. This film feels classic. Some might call it timeless. It's a throwback, and yet many of the themes, including how people with money or privilege operate in the world, feel very current. Could you tell us a little bit about what drew you to this story?
Well, it began really with the idea to write something for Benicio del Toro to play. I mean, it's Benicio. I had this idea of a kind of Euro tycoon, of a Aristotle Onassis kind of type, something like that. And in the course of time, we did quite a bit of research about different men of that kind, and the characters are it's a mixture of many historical figures, historical capitalists, especially of the 50s, of that part of the 20th century.
Are you drawn to that clash what it means to have that money and spend it? Or at a more perhaps simple level, does it just make for more adventure when somebody has the money to spend?
Well, I think that, when somebody has the means to empower himself to, and it's usually a him, to make decisions for large groups of people, to control resources and workforces, and someone who's not elected but has made it possible for himself to kind of run a population. It makes for an interesting character. People like that, people I've seen like that, been around like that, they're fascinating because each one is totally unique because they have the power to do what they want. They go their own ways, and at the same time, there are certain things that are more like a type, I think, about with people like that. So that was the kind of character we wanted to explore.
Mm-hmm. Watching this film, one is transported, but there's also echoes of the world we live in today, what you just mentioned, what money does, and like it or not, the role of violence and the threat of violence, which you explore at times with whimsy, but then with gravity. And then you have a moment I want to show where we have folks who, you'll tell us, they seem to be perhaps invoking the threat of violence for both financial and political terms. Take a look.
Why are you shooting my ceiling?
This is a robbery on behalf
I understand that. I'm asking about my ceiling. You idiots are destroying a magnificent nightclub.
What's going on there? And were you exploring the idea that sometimes there's resistance that takes matters into its own hands?
Yes. I think those characters are called, if I can remember it right, what's in our movie, the Radical Freedom Militia Corps. The Radical Freedom Militia Corps. I believe that's right. Richard Ayoade is the leader of a group of guerrilla rebels who they're terrorists, but they have a code. These guys, and they play a pretty crucial role in the journey our character takes in the story. And but also we have a wonderful actor who plays that part.
Yeah, he's also, I think, the voice in Krapopolis, right?
Is that right?
I think so.
Richard what? I don't know.
Incredible presence, incredible voice, which brings us to your casting. You're legendary for this. I don't think that's an overstatement in today's film world. Here you have Tom Hanks, Scarlett Johansson, Bryan Cranston, Benedict Cumberbatch, often I know there's no small parts, but they have less screen time than they usually do. And we checked, Wes, so this isn't us. These are celebrated actors who've said over the years, they do choose to work with you, sometimes under different conditions, because of your approach as a director. Take a look.
Like watching him discover and use Michael as like God discovering water, it seems like a pretty obvious natural element to have in his arsenal as a filmmaker. It was the perfect partnership.
So I read the script, but the script was so precisely written. I mean, you could tell that this guy knew exactly what he was doing. Yeah. You knew exactly what he wanted to make.
We have dinner at one table every single night with Wes and all guests, and it's like actor camp. We get to experience this. On a Wes Anderson film, there are no trailers, dressing rooms. You all there's no hierarchy, there's no call sheet. You just are ready to go about 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning in your wardrobe.
That's good manners, that's tact. And, he's learned that from the really great directors operate that way. The soft guys and the smart ones and the great ones come up and they go, okay, and it's just very private thing.
That's your natural style, or you set out to do that?
It's funny seeing those. That's a walk down memory lane, seeing these guys. Yes, even Brian's talking about no trailers and so on. I think for me, I've been making movies a long time now. I'm old now, and I must have made 11 or 12 movies. And I saw over the course of the movies the ways I didn't want to work. And I figured out the ways I do. And what I like is to have the cast feel like a real company, to all be together, to not have so much of a hierarchy, in fact, for everybody to sort of be at the top of the hierarchy together.
Director Wes Anderson, thank you for joining us. The new film is The Venetian Scheme, available in all theaters nationwide. This was part of our Maverick series. You can go to msnbc.com/ARI to see more. That's our time. The weeknight starts now.